In March 1943, the massive wings of the P-47 Thunderbolt appeared over the skies of Europe for the first time. From temporary airfields in Britain, they roared upward to escort the B-17 and B-24 flying fortresses, heading toward targets deep inside German territory. For the newly arrived American pilots, this was the long-awaited moment, their first direct confrontation with the Luftwaffe's most lethal war machines. But for the enemy, the sight provoked more mocking laughter than fear. The German pilots, long accustomed to the deadly agility of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the cold-blooded lethality of the Focke-Wulf FW-190, saw the P-47 as a joke. To them, the Thunderbolt was nothing more than a clumsy block of metal trying to masquerade as a fighter plane. Its bulky shape, heavy body, and broad, ungainly wings made it look more like a flying truck than a state-of-the-art weapon. Many Luftwaffe pilots gave it mocking nicknames: the pregnant cow, the giant flying target, or even the roaring tin can. What made their laughter even louder were the results of the first dogfights. When the P-47 was initially deployed, many American pilots were still unaccustomed to handling such a large and heavy aircraft. Takeoffs and landings were already a challenge, let alone trying to twist and turn in high-speed duels against seasoned opponents. They carried 8 powerful 50-caliber machine guns, but often had no chance to fire as their adversaries vanished from sight after just a few turns. In the deep blue skies, the contrast was striking. The compact, nimble Bf-109s and FW-190s were like sharp blades, while the P-47 was heavy and sluggish, like a sledgehammer awkwardly attempting to join a graceful dance. Inevitably, in those early months, Thunderbolt squadrons suffered considerable losses, especially when facing German aces, battle-hardened pilots with hundreds of victories to their names. One Luftwaffe pilot's diary entry from spring 1943 captured the scorn. "The Americans have finally brought a new fighter, but we see nothing to fear. It is too big, too slow, too clumsy. A flying cow, and with just a little skill we can turn it into a heap of scrap metal." The laughter of German pilots seemed to echo across Europe's skies. In those first weeks, even some British allies were doubtful. They were used to the agility of the Spitfire, the compact design of the Hurricane, and when they saw the bulky P-47, they found it hard to believe this machine could shift the balance of the air war. But to understand why the P-47 was mocked so much, one has to look back at its origins. Unlike many fighters designed with speed and maneuverability as their top priority, the Thunderbolt was born from a completely different philosophy. Under the leadership of Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation AS design team created a giant aircraft built around the powerful Pratt Whitney R-2800 engine and a complex turbo-supercharger system. The result was a machine 1.5 times heavier than a Spitfire, significantly larger than a Bf-109, and, at first glance, hard to believe it was a fighter at all, rather than an attack aircraft. While American engineers were proud of their monster, the pilots had to face the harsh reality. The aircraft could not turn quickly, nor take off easily from short runways. A sharp pull at high speed could make a pilot lose control instantly. During training, more than a few rookies bitterly remarked that flying the P-47 was like trying to steer an elephant with a thin bridle. When it entered combat, these limitations became even more apparent. At medium altitudes, the P-47 took too long to climb into position, while German pilots could quickly seize the advantage. Escorting B-17 bombers was fraught with risk. If ambushed by the Luftwaffe, a P-47 squadron could be scattered and lose several aircraft within minutes. Reports of losses spread back to base, creating a heavy atmosphere. Some American pilots began to question the Air Force's strategic choice. Why deploy such a large, cumbersome aircraft when the enemy possessed sleek predators like the FW-190? Not a few British officers whispered that perhaps the Americans trusted too much in their industry, without realizing that air combat requires finesse, not brute strength. Meanwhile, the Germans reveled in their arrogance. Luftwaffe aces, such as Adolf Galland and Johannes Steinhoff, repeatedly emphasized the superiority of their fighters during this period. Each victory, each Thunderbolt shot down, only reinforced their belief that the P-47 would never pose a real threat. Yet behind the laughter lay a grave misjudgment. The Germans saw only the outer shell of the Thunderbolt, its bulk and lack of agility, without realizing that the giant hid immense potential. The P-47 was like a massive warrior, awkward in its first steps, but capable of becoming an unstoppable giant once its strength was mastered. History has often shown that the strong err when they underestimate their opponents. And in 1943, over the skies of Europe, the Luftwaffe was making the same mistake. The ridicule heaped upon the P-47. Thunderbolt was but a fleeting moment before the laughter faded. Because within just a year, the very pregnant cow they mocked would become a thunderous nightmare, unleashing fire and steel upon both the skies and the ground. The mocking laughter of German pilots still echoed across the skies of Europe in 1943. They saw the P-47 Thunderbolt as nothing more than a heavy block of metal that could fly, a harmless, pregnant cow. Yet beneath its bulky exterior, American engineers had embedded a power that even the renowned Luftwaffe could not have imagined. It was a combination of technology, industrial might, and strategic vision, elements that would gradually turn a joke into a nightmare. The heart of the Thunderbolt lay in its Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, one of World War II's mechanical masterpieces. With 18 cylinders arranged in a double row, a 46-liter displacement, and producing up to 2,000 horsepower, a staggering figure for the time, this engine, coupled with a unique turbo supercharger system, allowed the P-47 to maintain high power at altitudes above 9,000 meters, where thinner air would sap other fighters. While the Bf-109 and FW-190 struggled at high altitude, the Thunderbolt could climb and dive with terrifying speed. Its survivability was equally remarkable. The P-47's fuselage was heavily armored around the cockpit, fuel tanks, and engine. Unlike most German aircraft, it used air cooling instead of liquid, eliminating the risk of engine failure due to coolant leaks. In combat, Thunderbolts could take hundreds of rounds and still return. Pilots often recounted landing with bullet-riddled fuselages, torn wings, even nearly shattered tails. Yet the Iron Beast brought them home safely. Then came its firepower. Unlike typical fighters with 2 to 4 machine guns, the Thunderbolt carried 8 50-caliber Browning M2s, 4 per wing, with over 3,400 rounds. A few seconds of trigger time unleashed a wall of fire capable of annihilating any target, from enemy fighters to heavy bombers. German pilots later admitted that facing a sweep of 50-caliber rounds left almost no chance of survival. Sometimes just a few hits could destroy a Bf-109. But the P-47's strength was not only mechanical or ballistic, it was tactical. Early on, American pilots tried dogfighting in the P-47, a deadly mistake. They quickly realized the plane's true advantage lay in its diving speed and high-altitude performance. Thus was born the boom and zoom tactic. Dive from above at incredible speed, unleash a ferocious burst, then climb back up to prepare for the next attack. This approach reversed the battlefield. In a turn-based dogfight with a Bf-109, a Thunderbolt would lose, but diving at over 800 km/h, it became an unstoppable arrow. By the time the enemy could react, the Thunderbolt was already climbing out of range. Combat soon proved this strategy effective. American pilots began racking up victories while returning more safely from missions. Robert S. Johnson's story exemplifies this. In one engagement, his plane took over 200 hits from an FW-190, the canopy shattered, the fuselage riddled, yet the Thunderbolt remained airborne. Johnson returned in near impossible condition, a symbol of the P-47's immortality. While the Luftwaffe still laughed, American pilots understood they possessed a giant awakening. They learned to turn the aircraft's bulk into an advantage. Its weight allowed faster dives, its strong frame absorbed damage, and the 850 caliber guns combined with new tactics made it a genuine thunderbringer. Interestingly, the Germans dubbed the Thunderbolt Jabo, short for Jagdbomber, fighter bomber, mocking it as a mere attack aircraft. Yet this nickname inadvertently foretold the future. In the coming years, the P-47 would excel not only as a fighter, but also as one of history's most fearsome ground attack planes, raining fire on tanks, convoys, and railways. By late 1943, the P-47's hidden power was beginning to surface. The Germans still laughed, but doubt had crept in. They realized this giant opponent was not so easily felled. Once the Americans refined tactics, trained pilots effectively, and fully leveraged industrial might, the joke would become a nightmare. The Thunderbolt was a clumsy warrior entering the arena, jeered for its awkwardness, but gradually revealing massive strength and iron resolve. When this machine struck, no one dared underestimate it, and this was only the beginning of a legendary chapter in the skies. The summer of 1943 saw Europe's skies still engulfed in bloody struggle. The U.S. Army Air Force's B-17 and B-24 flying fortresses penetrated deeper into German territory, targeting factories, fuel depots, ports, and transportation hubs. Yet every mission was a life-or-death gamble. Without effective escort, these massive bombers were little more than prey for the wolf packs of the Luftwaffe. In the early months, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary escort fighter, seemed powerless. Its bulk prevented tight turns against Bf-109s or FW-190s, and its slow climb rate often put pilots at a disadvantage. The result? Many dogfights ended with P-47 squadrons scattered and B-17s suffering devastating losses. Reports of casualties piled up, prompting both Washington and London to question the effectiveness of this giant monster. Yet amid the shadow of defeat, a tactical revolution was taking shape. Instead of mimicking Spitfires or Mustangs, American pilots studied the Thunderbolt's nature to uncover its true weapon. They realized the P-47 was not for dogfighting, but for diving attacks, not for prolonged chases, but for swift, decisive strikes. This new tactic was named simply but powerfully, boom and zoom. The principle was clear. P-47 pilots climbed to superior altitude, using the power of the R-2800 engine and turbo supercharger. From there, they dove like steel arrows, reaching speeds exceeding 500 mph, over 800 km/h, faster than many German planes could handle. At the right range, they unleashed a hail of bullets from 850 caliber machine guns. Just seconds were enough. Then, they pulled up, letting momentum carry the Thunderbolt out of range. Survivors among the enemy could only watch helplessly as the flying dinosaur vanished. At first, many pilots hesitated, accustomed to dogfighting as a measure of skill. But as comrades returned more often and victories accumulated, doubt vanished. Boom and zoom proved perfectly suited to the P-47. A notable example occurred in the Rouen and Lille regions in late 1943. Instead of being overwhelmed, P-47 squadrons struck from above, dove, destroyed targets, and vanished. Some confident German aces were reduced to debris within seconds. Surviving Luftwaffe pilots admitted bitterly, "We couldn't react in time. One moment the sky was clear. The next, fire and bullets rained down. Then everything was gone." American pilots also learned to exploit the Thunderbolt's extraordinary durability. In direct confrontations, the P-47 could absorb far more fire than other aircraft, allowing risky attacks. Some pilots even charged through enemy formations, firing, leaving chaos behind, and returned with bullet-riddled planes, but still alive. This resilience created confidence. The Thunderbolt might be ungainly, but it was a flying tank, absorbing damage to deliver deadly counterstrikes. The psychological shift was profound. Pilots who had once feared now grew confident. They understood their aircraft, turning its bulk into an advantage. From a pregnant cow, the Thunderbolt became a giant predator, not fast or nimble, but powerful and timely. For the Luftwaffe, it was a shock. They had once mocked the enemy, but now fear crept in. They could no longer lure the P-47 into turning fights. The beast refused to play. They could not easily shoot it down, as the Thunderbolt absorbed damage like no other. And when the R-2800 engine roared from above, it sounded like a death drum, heralding the coming storm of 50-caliber bullets. A German officer wrote in a report, "The enemy has changed. They no longer fly clumsily. Now they dive from above, strike swiftly, then vanish. It's very hard to counter. Their aircraft seems to withstand more fire than we do." From late 1943 into 1944, the balance of Europe's skies began to shift. Thunderbolt squadrons grew more effective, numbers increased, and the boom and zoom tactic left the Luftwaffe perplexed. Mocking smiles gave way to tension. They knew each sortie might bring them face to face with these steel monsters that could not be easily felled. Ironically, the bulk that had once drawn ridicule became the key to success. The large frame allowed for a powerful engine, heavy armament, and thick armor. Its weight turned dives into thunderous strikes. What seemed a weakness had become an advantage. From that moment on, the P-47 was no longer a joke. It had entered the ranks of legends, a thunderous nightmare in the sky, delivering destruction from its heavy wings. The Luftwaffe began to understand their early misjudgment, but by then it was far too late to laugh. Spring 1944, the rise of the P-47 Thunderbolt. By the spring of 1944, the skies over Europe no longer resembled the early days of the air war. While bombing missions in 1942-1943 often ended in firestorms with waves of B-17s destroyed, a new force had changed the balance, the P-47 Thunderbolt. No longer the ridiculed pregnant cow, the Thunderbolt had become a genuine nightmare. The major battles of 1944 would prove this beyond doubt. The Battle of Regensburg, Thunderbolt's revenge. On February 25, 1944, one of the boldest bombing campaigns began, Big Week, a joint plan between the U.S. Army Air Forces and the RAF. Its goal was to cripple German aircraft production and prevent the Luftwaffe from building new planes. Regensburg, home to a key Bf-109 factory, became a central target. Hundreds of B-17s were deployed, escorted by unprecedented numbers of Thunderbolts. The Luftwaffe was confident, as usual, expecting the B-17s to fall like rain. But the skies ahead were not just bombers. Squadrons of P-47s circled at superior altitude, ready to dive. The roar of the R-2800 engines thundered. Thunderbolts dove at incredible speed, unleashing a hail of 50-caliber bullets. Within minutes, the sky became a battlefield. FW-190s exploded, Bf-109s burned. The hunters had become the hunted. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson later wrote, "We dove like death from above. I remember the terror on a German pilot's face as my P-47 came straight at him. He didn't stand a chance." By the end of Big Week, the Luftwaffe had lost nearly 600 aircraft, while U.S. losses were minimal. For the first time, the balance of the skies truly shifted. Berlin skies. Thunderbolt strikes the Reich. March 1944 marked another milestone. U.S. squadrons began escorting bombers directly to Berlin. Previously, this seemed almost impossible due to the long, dangerous flight and the Luftwaffe's control over the capital. But with drop tanks and new tactics, the P-47 proved it could reach farther than the enemy imagined. On March 6, 1944, hundreds of B-17s headed for Berlin, escorted by P-47s and newly introduced P-51s. When the Luftwaffe intervened, they met a steel wall. Thunderbolts dove, raining bullets, tearing enemy formations apart. A German pilot later recalled, "We had never seen anything like it. The American planes didn't just escort, they attacked. They hunted us relentlessly. Berlin had never been so threatened." For Berliners, the roar of the Thunderbolts was a warning. The Third Reich was no longer safe. even at its heart. Normandy, Thunderbolt as a flying tank. On the ground, the P-47 revealed yet another role, heavy fighter bomber. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, over 1,000 Thunderbolts participated in Normandy. They not only escorted bombers, but strafed, bombed, and fired rockets at tanks, artillery, and supply columns. With a bomb load of up to 1.5 tons, the P-47 became almost a fighter-bomber hybrid. In Normandy's fields, the roar of R-2800 engines and rocket blasts turned the Thunderbolt into a flying tank. One U.S. soldier wrote, "We were pinned down by German artillery when suddenly the familiar engine roar came. Thunderbolts dived, fired rockets at the guns. In minutes, the enemy was silenced. Without them, we would have died on that beach." For German soldiers, the Thunderbolt was no longer a mere fighter. It was a nightmare descending from the sky, tearing trenches and convoys apart. Wehrmacht reports called it Jabo, Jagdbomber, fighter bomber, with a mix of fear and helplessness. Thanks to this support, Allied forces quickly expanded their foothold in France. The Thunderbolt had proven itself not just as an aerial protector, but as a ground destroyer. From mockery to pride, 1944 also marked a shift in American pilots' perception of the P-47. In 1942, many were embarrassed to fly a clumsy block of metal. By 1944, they took pride in sitting in the cockpit of the Jug, the affectionate nickname for the Thunderbolt. Why Jug? Some said it resembled a milk jug, but to pilots it symbolized durability, strength, and unbreakable resolve. Stories circulated of comrades returning with bullet-riddled planes, missing wings, yet landing safely. They called the P-47 a flying coffin for the Luftwaffe, as enemy attacks often backfired. Soon, the P-47's kill rate skyrocketed. Aces like Francis Gabreski, Robert S. Johnson, and David Schilling scored dozens of victories in the Jug. Strategic impact. The Luftwaffe begins to collapse. The Thunderbolt's dominance was not merely tactical, it reshaped overall strategy. Under immense pressure from U.S. aircraft production, the Luftwaffe now faced nearly invincible opponents. Daylight bombing became feasible as German factories, fuel depots, railways, and bridges were systematically destroyed. Exhausted German pilots now faced a near-indestructible foe. They dubbed the Thunderbolt with names of contempt and fear: Steel Cow, Flying Tank. Behind the mockery lay a truth they could not deny. The Luftwaffe was losing control of the skies. The Thunderbolt proved its power not only through guns and bombs, but through sheer existence. From a joke to a pillar of the U.S. Air Force. In the decisive battles of 1944, from Regensburg to Normandy, it wrote its own chapter in history, an indispensable part of the Allied victory. While the skies over Europe trembled under the power of the P-47 Thunderbolt, halfway across the world, the war in the Pacific was entering a brutal phase. From Guadalcanal to Saipan, from New Guinea to the Philippines, the U.S. military faced an entirely different enemy, the Japanese Empire. And here, once again, the Thunderbolt proved that it was not just a weapon for Europe, but a global force. A new challenge, a different opponent. In Europe, the P-47 often faced nimble Bf-109s or heavily armed FW-190s. In the Pacific, however, its opponent had a very different face, the Mitsubishi A6M0, the legendary Japanese fighter. The Zero was light, agile, and could turn in impossibly tight spaces. In the early years of the war, it struck terror into American pilots, leading many to believe Japanese aircraft had magic in the air. Yet its weaknesses were clear: minimal armor, poor durability, and lower speed compared to America's new generation fighters. When the Thunderbolt was deployed to the Pacific, many doubted it could handle such a nimble foe. How could a heavy block of metal contend with a ghost-like Zero? Yet the answer was the same as in Europe. the P-47 didn't dogfight. It dominated with sheer power. Philippines. Thunderbolt debuts in Asia. In late 1944, during the campaign to liberate the Philippines, the P-47 saw its first large-scale action in the Pacific. JUG squadrons were deployed from newly captured bases to support landings at Leyte and Luzon. Initially, Japanese pilots thought these were just another variant of the P-40 or P-38 they had faced. But when Thunderbolts dove at terrifying speed, raining bullets like a storm, they realized the enemy had changed. In dogfights over Luzon, many Zeros were shredded in minutes. An American pilot recalled, "I dove from above, pulled the trigger for only a few seconds. When I pulled up and looked down, the Zero had turned into a cloud of black smoke. I didn't need to chase it. The Thunderbolt wasn't meant for that. One strike was enough, then climb away." With 8 50-caliber machine guns, the Thunderbolt could even tear a Zero's wing off in a single short burst. Once hit, a Zero had almost no chance of survival. From sky to ground, the all-purpose destroyer. In the Pacific, the Thunderbolt was not limited to fighter missions. Just like in Normandy, it quickly assumed the role of fighter bomber. On tiny coral islands with heavily fortified Japanese positions, the P-47 became an unexpected nightmare. Equipped with bombs, rockets, and even napalm tanks, each sortie became a storm of fire. During the Luzon campaign, P-47 squadrons relentlessly bombed Japanese convoys, cutting off supplies. Bridges, fuel depots, and makeshift airfields were systematically destroyed. Not only Zeros, but Japanese anti-aircraft guns and tanks also fell victim to the Thunderbolt's firepower. A Japanese veteran recalled, "We feared the P-47 more than the B-29. The B-29 came at night, but the Thunderbolt came in daylight, low, firing straight at us. There was nowhere to hide." Burma and India. Where Thunderbolt made its name beyond the Philippines, the Thunderbolt left a lasting mark in Burma and India, where Allied forces confronted Japanese troops in harsh jungle conditions. Here, the P-47 served in close air support, protecting British, American, and Indian forces on the ground. Squadrons launched from forward airfields in India, crossed the Himalayas, and struck Japanese supply columns in Burmese valleys. The P-47's durability was a major advantage. Even when hit by ground fire, it could return to base. Japanese aircraft, by contrast, rarely survived similar damage. A British pilot said of the Thunderbolt in Burma, "In the jungle, there's nowhere to make an emergency landing. If hit, only a P-47 can get you home. That's why we trusted it like a comrade." Comparison with the P-51 Mustang. 2 stars shine. When people think of air combat, the P-51 Mustang often comes to mind. In reality, the P-51 and P-47 often operated side by side, both crucial to ultimate victory. In Europe, the Mustang's long range was preferred for deep escort missions to Berlin, while the Thunderbolt focused more on ground attack and medium-range combat. In the Pacific, the P-51 arrived later, mostly in the final stages. Throughout 1944, the P-47 was the main workhorse, both for escort and fire support. The difference in combat style was clear. The Mustang was fast and sleek, the Thunderbolt powerful and resilient. One pilot remarked, "If the P-51 is a razor-sharp sword, the P-47 is a steel hammer. One cuts, the other crushes. Both are essential." Numbers that speak. By the end of 1944, the P-47 had proven its global value with impressive figures. Over 600 American pilots became aces, 5+ kills, flying the P-47. In total, the P-47 shot down more than 7,000 enemy aircraft. In ground attack roles, it destroyed tens of thousands of vehicles, trains, and Axis fortifications. Pilot survival rates were significantly higher than many other aircraft, thanks to the P-47's incredible durability. These numbers not only proved the Thunderbolt AS success, but also confirmed it as one of World War II's most versatile aircraft. From mockery to global icon. Looking back, the journey of the P-47 is truly remarkable. Initially ridiculed as heavy and unwieldy, it became a terror through the patience, creativity, and iron will of its pilots. In Europe, it stripped the Luftwaffe of advantage. In the Pacific, it shattered Zeros and broke Japanese defenses. In Burma and India, it gave soldiers the confidence to survive in the jungles. The Thunderbolt showed that war requires not only agile weapons, but machines that can endure punishment and deliver devastating blows at the right moment. It became proof that strength and durability could forge a legend. When World War II ended in the summer of 1945, the skies over Europe and the Pacific fell silent. The P-47 Thunderbolts, once roaring through the air, now rested quietly on runways. Their smoky battle scars faded, leaving only darkened marks on their fuselages. But the story of the Thunderbolt did not end there. It lived on, not only in the memories of the pilots who flew it, but also in the annals of aviation history as a testament to resilience and power. Huge numbers, a wartime legacy. Throughout World War II, the United States produced more than 15,600 P-47 Thunderbolts, one of the most widely built fighter aircraft in history. These numbers reflect not only American industrial strength, but also the confidence placed in this machine. The Thunderbolt flew over 750,000 combat missions, dropped tens of thousands of tons of bombs, shot down more than 7,000 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, and destroyed countless ground targets. A total of 602 pilots became aces, shooting down 5 or more aircraft, flying the Thunderbolt, a number that speaks volumes. Remarkably, P-47 pilots had a much higher survival rate than those flying many other aircraft. With thick armor, a powerful engine, and a design that could withstand hits, the Thunderbolt brought countless pilots home, even when riddled with bullet holes. In their memories, the Jug was more than just a plane. It was a loyal companion that saved their lives time and again. From mockery to icon. When it first appeared in 1942, the Thunderbolt was ridiculed as a pregnant cow, a flying brick, or a winged tank. But just a few years later, those nicknames took on a completely different meaning. Not mockery, but respect. American pilots affectionately called it the Jug, a big, unbreakable milk jug. German pilots called it the flying tank, a name both derisive and bitter, because they knew that once the Jug appeared, the skies no longer belonged to them. Japanese pilots, once proud of the Zero, had to admit that before the P-47, they had lost their last advantage. The Thunderbolt had transformed from a disappointment into a source of pride, a rare metamorphosis in aviation history. It proved that weaknesses, when used correctly, could become strengths, and sometimes the big, clunky monster was exactly what could change the course of battle. After the war, the Thunderbolt didn't rest. When World War II ended, many assumed the Thunderbolt would soon be retired to make way for newer fighters like the P-51 Mustang or the F-80 Shooting Star, America's first jet. In reality, the P-47 continued to serve in numerous air forces around the world. In the U.S., the P-47 remained in the Army Air Forces until 1949, then transitioned to the Air National Guard. It became a training aircraft and a secondary fighter, but retained an important role in the early Cold War. In Europe, many Allied nations, including France, Italy, and Belgium, continued using the P-47 during post-war rebuilding. It was a cost-effective, powerful, and readily available tool that helped these countries restore their air forces. In Latin America, Brazil and Mexico used the P-47 for many years. Notably, Brazil deployed a P-47 squadron to Italy late in World War II and later regarded the Thunderbolt as a symbol of its air force. The global presence of the Thunderbolt demonstrated that it was not merely an American weapon, but a machine trusted by nations worldwide. Comparison with the Mustang, history's fair judgment. In public memory, the P-51 Mustang is often mentioned more than the P-47. The Mustang had long range, a sleek appearance, and is linked to images of escorting B-17s all the way to Berlin. But if the Mustang was a sword, the Thunderbolt was a steel hammer. And in war, both were essential. The Mustang could fly farther, but the Thunderbolt could take more punishment, carry more bombs, and was more fearsome in the ground attack role. Without the Thunderbolt smashing Axis convoys, artillery, and bridges, the Allied advances on land would have faced far greater obstacles. History has a way of being fair. Today, the Mustang is more famous in films and media, but in military history circles, the P-47 is still celebrated as one of the most versatile aircraft of World War II. Legacy in the pilots' hearts. Pilots who flew the Thunderbolt remember it with particular reverence. Francis Gabby Gabreski, America's top ace in Europe, once said, "P-47 isn't graceful, and it's not pretty, but it's reliable. It takes me out and brings me back. That's all a pilot needs." Robert S. Johnson, one of the first Thunderbolt aces, was hit by over 20 rounds from an FW-190, with his aircraft full of holes and hydraulic systems damaged, yet the Jug still brought him safely back. Later, he said, "Without the Jug, I would have died that day. I owe my life to that monster." In their memories, the Thunderbolt was more than a plane. It was a talisman of survival. The Thunderbolt in museums and today's skies. Today, many P-47s survive in aviation museums worldwide. Smithsonian, USA, Duxford, UK, Le Bourget, France, among others. Some have been restored and still fly in air shows. Each time a Pratt Whitney R-2800 engine roars to life, spectators feel as though time reverses, transporting them back to the fiery skies of 1944. In the U.S., vintage aircraft enthusiasts often call the P-47 the juggernaut of the sky. They preserve and maintain it so future generations understand that once this heavy machine wrote its own legend. The lesson of the Thunderbolt. The greatest legacy of the Thunderbolt is not just its combat achievements, but the lesson it teaches about true value. At first, it was mocked for its bulk and clumsiness compared to the Spitfire or Mustang. But war is not measured by beauty, but by survivability and destructive power. The P-47 showed that sometimes clumsiness is the key to strength. Moreover, it highlights the importance of tactical creativity. If American pilots had tried to dogfight Bf-109s with the P-47, it might have failed completely. But through boom and zoom tactics and adaptation, it turned weaknesses into strengths. Finally, the Thunderbolt is a testament to American industrial power. Producing over 15,000 aircraft, each nearly 8 tons, required mobilizing an entire economy. The Thunderbolt was more than a plane. It was a symbol of a nation at war. Conclusion. From laughter to thunder. The journey of the P-47. Thunderbolt is a unique story in the history of warfare. From being ridiculed to becoming a nightmare in the sky, from a design seemingly destined to fail to an immortal legend. The roar of the R-2800 engines over Normandy, Berlin, Luzon, or Burma now exists only in memory. Yet for those who know history, each roar was a thunderclap, signaling death for the enemy and life for the Allies. The Thunderbolt may not have been the prettiest plane nor the most famous, but it was one of the most important. A heavy, powerful, and durable machine, symbolizing the iron will of an entire generation. And that is the eternal legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt, from ridicule to the thunder of victory.